Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. I'm James Baggett, I'm the founder of Car Dealer magazine, and today I'm talking to Catherine Faiers. She's the COO of Auto Trader, and we'll be talking all things used cars. Catherine, good morning, how are you?
Morning, James. I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to see you. So, Catherine, we reported this morning on some incredible news that the dealers are now operating, according to Auto Trader's figures, at 90% of normal levels. I mean, that's quite a jump since we last talked in January. What's been supercharging that?
Well, March, yeah, you're right, James. March has got off to a really strong start. Last week, we saw a big positive step up in our audience performance with over 15 million visits on Auto Trader, which was a 5% increase week on week. And last week's visits were up 24% on that same period 2 years ago. We're now using that as the comparator because clearly March last year began to be impacted by COVID. That proxy sold data is really the best indicator we have of where on average retailers are trading. So it's based on the number of unique VRMs we see being removed from Auto Trader. And we have seen that step up very consistently through January, where we were at sort of 60 to 70% of usual or typical volumes, up to 70, 80 odd percent in February, and now tracking at the end of February and early March into that 90% level. I think it's a growing sign that consumers are increasingly looking to get back into market, increasingly engaging with the buying journey. And now we're a very large number of months into this pandemic. They're not wanting to wait anymore. They are looking to come to market and are going with the buying journeys that are there for them, which are predominantly digital at the moment.
I find that so surprising when I read that headline this morning, purely because the people I've been chatting to, I know who are in the market, are saying, "Oh, I'm just going to wait. I want to try the car before I buy it. I want to go and see it." I mean, clearly that's anecdotal, but I just found that very interesting that consumers are getting over this test drive problem, the fact that they can't try the cars and they're actually looking to buy. So, I mean, do you think that those test drive issues has simply gone away?
Well, we're seeing through our research and we're seeing through the behaviours on our site that over 60% of consumers are now open to buying entirely online. So completing that full end-to-end journey where the experience of buying online is brought to life to them or demonstrated to them. So it does suggest that the number of the barriers that would have been there in the past for consumers and the scale of them is definitely decreasing. And we've seen from our consumer research in the last week that test drives, which have very consistently been quoted as the big barrier for consumers because they want to experience the car before buying it, we're seeing that almost 2/3 of consumers, if retailers are putting in place the 14-day distance selling, that money back guarantee to effectively treat the handover period as an extended test drive, if you like, we are seeing that 2/3 of consumers would then be comfortable buying without a test drive. We've also seen during lockdown much more widespread use of warranties, of inspection reports, of video recordings, of live video viewings, all sorts of techniques to really bring the car to life for consumers and remove some of those other barriers to buying online. So I think we won't see online fully replace the current model. We do see 30% of consumers still say that they don't want to buy a car online almost under any circumstances. But that blended retailing model that lots of people have been talking about, where consumers are completing more of the journey online, more of the jobs to be done are being completed in that digital environment, and the forecourt's absolutely playing a role. But it might be, just to collect the vehicle, or it might be to complete the finance and collect the vehicle. It will be some of the steps will be completed on forecourt still, but not to the extent that we've seen over the last few years, where typically most of the buying journey would have been done on the forecourt.
It sounds like consumers are getting used to this 14-day period. I mean, at the start, every dealer who's selling at the moment has to offer this 14-day money-back guarantee as part of the distance selling regulations. But I think at the start of this, consumers didn't really understand that, did they? I mean, I think that was quite unusual for people when they were buying a car. Do you think that consumers have now got used to this? They understand it more and more as this lockdown has gone on, and that's given them the confidence to buy these cars without those test drives?
I think that's right. I mean, if you think about what we're seeing in other retail categories, we've seen a significant step in online sales penetration across every retail vertical. Many commentators have talked about the fact that we've seen years, 7 years, if you believe McKinsey, of digital acceleration within months. And so consumers are changing behaviors, are experiencing different ways of buying and engaging in that retail journey in all sorts of other sectors. We're now at an incredible 50% of all products and services in the UK either being bought fully or partially online. And I think what is clear is that the longer the pandemic impacts all of our lives in this way, the more permanent those behavior changes are likely to be, and the more confident and the more embedded all of those behavior changes become. And so I think the more consumers embrace this way of buying across more categories, the more it's likely to spread, and that rate of growth is likely to continue to accelerate. There's been quite. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, Catherine.
That's okay. I was just going to say, there's been, if you look at from PwC to BCG, there's been lots of research published in the last few weeks where they've taken big cohorts of the UK population and asked them about their buying behaviours over the last 12 months and how they might impact and influence how they buy and behave in the next 12 months. And actually, there's a lot of evidence that a lot of those behaviours are going to be sticky, and consumers are saying that, you know, some of those behaviour changes will be permanent. Clearly, none of us know what consumers are going to do when we do emerge in April and beyond, but there is now quite a lot of data that suggests, as well as us seeing it in the data, that that behaviour change may well be reasonably permanent.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We reported this morning. There was a quote from the boss of motorway, and he said most industries, once they go online, they don't go back again. I mean, Auto Trader is a very good example of that, isn't it? You know, a business that took hold of the online journey and has supercharged that, and now you would never go back to a printed publication. Do you think car dealers are going to buck that trend? Do you think they're going to be the ones that are going to be different? Do you think that once this pandemic disappears, that they're going to go back to the way that they used to always sell cars, or is this online journey now embedded in the industry and something that's going to continue forever?
I think, I mean, firstly, huge credit to the way the industry has responded to the pandemic over the last 12 months. To be able to see and report some of the, you know, data we're seeing on our platform at those transaction levels is really incredible. To think that we are at close to 90% of volume. So I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the industry's responded, has been very agile, has responded quickly, has responded well. And, you know, many retailers have, whether it's launched new products on their own websites, whether it's embraced the products that we've launched to help them build out those digital retailing journeys, they have rethought their operating models, and they are now operating in quite a fundamentally different way. And I think, and I hope actually for the industry, that retailers continue to embrace those changes that we've seen and continue to take advantage of the opportunities that are very clearly there. I think we've all learned, haven't we, over the last few months, that you have to take the opportunity you can find in the most difficult of circumstances. I think hopefully as the circumstances get a bit easier, we have to continue to capitalize on the opportunities that are there and take advantage of, you know, this acceleration that we've seen in the last few months in consumer behavior, and see the benefits that can be there for retailers in terms of profitability and cost base.
With the fact that dealers are doing 90% of normal at the moment, and the showrooms opening on April the 12th, what do you think business will look like when showrooms are open? Are we looking at 110% of normal, 120% of normal? I mean, just how good can it get?
So, I mean, much has been written about the billions that consumers have been saving over the last 12 months. And the big questions are really, how quickly are they going to spend it, and in which categories are they going to spend it? We know that consumers have been depositing typically 4 to 5 times more than they typically would during the lockdown periods in 2020. And those saving periods have been heavily skewed towards lockdown. The good news was that last summer, if you remember, spending patterns and those saving levels reverted back to close to normal levels. So it does suggest that actually consumers, yeah, if they behave as they did last summer, which we expect them to, there's good reasons to believe that spending will come back quite quickly. Then if we think about whether automotive will benefit, well, we've seen lots of data to suggest that there's been a very positive shift towards car ownership, and that sentiment towards car ownership over the last 12 months, which just suggests that auto retail stands to benefit. So when we talk to consumers about affordability, for example, if 48% of them are more confident in affordability than they were 12 months ago, and consumer confidence in affordability is higher than it's been at any point since last January. 35% of consumers are now telling us that owning a car is more important to them, and there's still a good segment of consumers looking to avoid public transport by buying a car. That nervousness around social distancing, around how and where you travel, I think will remain with us for some time to come. And one of the most exciting and important shifts we've seen is that actually the fastest growing segment of audience on our platform is younger buyers. And if you remember, pre-pandemic, many commentators had written off this group of consumers, basically saying actually they're not interested in cars, they're going to use Uber, they're going to use car sharing, they're going to use all sorts of other services that mean actually they never end up having or wanting exclusive access to a car. And I do think for that cohort of consumers, the pandemic has shifted some of that perspective. And, you know, whilst they might look to own through finance or through leasing or subscription or other ownership models, I think there's a lot of evidence that they do very much want exclusive access to their own vehicle rather than necessarily, you know, defaulting to these sharing and other Uber-like services that are out there in the market.
So there's a lot of positive signs there, isn't there? I mean, so what are your thoughts for April? I mean, and beyond? Do you think there is this pent up demand is going to happen? I mean, you know, you've pointed to a lot of research that suggests it is. What would you say is going to happen?
Yeah, I think that trajectory we were on, if we think January 60-70% of normal levels, February we saw a step up, end of Feb, early March we've seen another step up. I'm hopeful that we'll get back to positive year on year if you go back to 2019, which I think is the right benchmark at that point, year on year growth. When the used car market was open, fully open last year, and forecourts were open, the used car transaction volumes were up about 5% year on year. And I'd like to hope we see those levels. I think April will be a bit odd because of the part month, you know, that we'll see. But for May, June, July onwards, I'd like to hope we'd be back at those types of levels, if not higher potentially, given some of those saving levels and the affordability stats that we see.
And what about holidays? I mean, at the moment, you know, there's a lot of talk that foreign holidays are still probably going to be off the table for much of the summer. But there are some countries that are starting to open up. I mean, this is the other thing that consumers are going to spend their cash on, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of people that are going to be desperate to get away. I mean, if foreign travel does open up, do you think that's going to have a negative impact on the car industry?
I'm not sure it needs to necessarily. So if consumer deposit levels are at 4 to 5 times the typical levels, I think the disposable income that we're talking about for most consumers won't preclude, you know, taking out finance on a car and booking a holiday for, if not 2021, then 2022. If you look at who has the income and where those savings sit, it's no surprise that it's typically the biggest increases have been in retirees and higher and middle income groups. They're the people that have been consistently in employment and haven't been able to spend in those other categories. So the nature of the recovery, you know, we might expect a slightly different performance in perhaps premium brands or in age or value of vehicle, which might be a bit different to what we saw last summer, with then some of perhaps the lower price categories being supported by this continued shift away from public transport. But I think there's the order of magnitude and the volume of income shift that there's been means that there's good capacity for holidays and other categories to recover, and automotive still to performance to still be robust and strong.
Let's hope they spend it on both those things. So with dealers preparing for the reopening, what would you say is the most important thing that they consider now as they're looking ahead to April as well?
Well, I think we know at any given point in time that the car buying cycle typically takes 2 to 3 months for a consumer. So in terms of actions today, it's obviously critical that cars are online during March, because March consumers will be April buyers or March audience, whether it's on dealers' websites, our websites, or other platforms. So be really visible and be in market now, because so much of April will be underwritten by activity that's happening now. Uh, I always say this when I'm asked on tips for retailers, but I think more than ever, this sense that we all need to be building for the future. It's really easy to say, really hard to do, but focusing on what can be done now, whether that's click and collect, home delivery, but then planning on these capabilities not being kind of temporary fixes to short-term market opportunities, but actually making them scalable, sustainable, so that they become embedded in retailers' operating models. I think it's going to be probably the most important transition that we're all going to need to work on. And then finally, I think it's probably helpful if we all still almost expect the unexpected. We've lived, through the last 12 months, and I think at every point, if you'd ask people for predictions on what might happen next or where the market might go to, we all probably would have, the spread you would have got would have been big, and on a number of occasions we would have been out with some of those future forecasts. But I think as we emerge, I think continuing to keep some of that agility and that responsiveness that the industry's shown so incredibly well, and operating very much still with that mindset, I think will put us all in good stead for the next 6-12 months.
And looking a little bit further ahead to the changes that we're going to see in the car market with the 2030 ban coming along. Firstly, on that point, do you think used car dealers are ready to sell electric cars?
I think in pockets they are, but I think the industry, all of us actually, Auto Trader included, we have a very long way to go to build, starting off with the terminology about how we talk about things, how we describe them to consumers, how we talk about them in the industry, how we define the different categories. We've all got a very, very long way to go, I think, to get our businesses and our thinking really ready for what 2030 will bring. We have seen, if you look at electric car demand on Auto Trader and the demand for alternatively fueled vehicles, we know whenever there's government announcements, whether there's a lot of PR or stories on this, that we see huge spikes on Auto Trader in consumer interest and engagement. And we've taken some steps to get the right filters, to get the right product classifications and representations there for those vehicles. But we know that the supply is actually not there in the way that we need it to be yet. And we've got to work with the industry to make sure that we're doing all we can to get ready. Because once we emerge from the pandemic, I think that 2030 agenda is going to become the big theme and the big talking point for all of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree on that point. And just one final thing on the 2030 ban. I mean, and I'm sure it's a wider topic that we can discuss in the future. But gut feeling, what do you think it's going to do to used car prices in the short to mid term, and also in the slightly longer term?
So I think short to mid term, everything we're seeing today gives us a lot of reasons to be confident that actually pricing will be robust for ICE vehicle types. We're still seeing very strong petrol and diesel pricing performance because we're seeing such strong consumer demand at the moment, and actually supply, once again, isn't keeping at pace with the demand that we're seeing. And for those consumers in particular looking to avoid public transport or looking to get that second or third car, then the price point of an electric vehicle, actually, whether it's new or used, is just not there for that segment of consumers. So there's good demand and lots of reasons to remain positive, I think, about where used car ICE demand will trend in short to medium term. I think we'll see as the 2030 agenda rolls out, I think we'll see quite different trends potentially by geography and by income cohort. So we already see today that demand for electric and alternatively fueled vehicles is typically concentrated in higher income categories, which then means that it actually becomes geographically quite concentrated to regions of the UK that have higher income bands living there. And we also see that it's typically demand strong for people looking for a second or third car. They're still not making electric vehicle choices for their primary car. There's a lot of work to be done on infrastructure, on subsidies and price point, really, I think, for that dynamic to materially shift. And I think that dynamic will take years to play out rather than months, and is going to need a different type of government support, is going to need different collaboration across the industry to really make that a reality.
Yeah, certainly an interesting topic to follow once this pandemic finally disappears. Catherine, thank you ever so much for your time today. I really appreciate you giving up your time and chatting to us.
Thanks, James. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Okay, great stuff. So for more car dealer lives like this one, you can log on to cardealermagazine.co.uk and click on the live tab at the top of the page. I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.